Welcome back to Tales from Outer Space, your window into the vast and often bewildering cosmos. I'm your host, Zixtara, bringing you stories from the far reaches of our galactic community. Today's tale comes from the archives of the Species Alliance, a story that changed the political landscape of our universe forever. It's a cautionary tale about translation, misunderstanding, and the terrible price of ignorance. So settle in, dear viewers, as we explore that one word that reshaped galactic history. The Universal Translator was, like most technologies, imperfect. Developed over centuries by the combined intellect of 17 species, it could render most concepts from one language to another with remarkable accuracy. The device analyzed not just vocabulary and syntax, but cultural context, historical references, and even pheromonal cues for species that communicated partially through chemical signals. It was a marvel of cooperative engineering, and it had enabled the formation of the Species Alliance, a loose confederation of civilizations spanning three spiral arms of the Milky Way. Humans, as relative newcomers to interstellar society, had integrated remarkably well. Despite their biological fragility and technological limitations, they possessed qualities that made them valuable members of the Alliance. Their adaptability, creativity, and peculiar brand of empathy had secured them positions throughout Alliance infrastructure. Within 2 centuries of first contact, humans constituted approximately 35% of all specialized labor forces across Alliance territories. They were particularly prevalent in medical services, education, engineering, and, ironically, diplomatic translation. Human linguists were prized for their intuitive grasp of semantic nuance. While the Universal Translator handled the bulk of day-to-day communication, humans often served as cultural interpreters, smoothing over the rough edges that technology couldn't quite polish. Their brains seemed uniquely suited to language acquisition, and many humans could speak 3 or 4 alien tongues with native-level fluency, a feat few other species could match. It was precisely this linguistic prowess that first drew the attention of the Draken Dominion's Intelligence Division. The Draken were an ancient civilization, reptilian in appearance and hierarchical in structure. They had been members of the Alliance for millennia, but maintained a distinct cultural identity and considerable military autonomy. Their society valued strength, discipline, and above all, control. The Dominion had expanded through conquest long before the Alliance's formation and had reluctantly accepted the diplomatic constraints of membership, only after calculating that the benefits outweighed the limitations. "We have identified an anomaly in human linguistic patterns," reported First Intelligence Officer Skarath to the Dominion's High Command. "A word that the Universal Translator consistently fails to render in our language." The High Command chamber was dark-heated to the precise temperature preferred by Draken physiology. 7 massive reptilians reclined on thermal platforms, their scales gleaming in the dim red light. "Explain," commanded the Central Commander, her voice a low hiss that echoed through the chamber. The word appears in multiple human languages with slight variations. In their dominant trade language, it is pronounced kindergarten. The Universal Translator typically bypasses it entirely or substitutes a generic term for education facility. But our analysts have determined this is inaccurate. "A single untranslatable word is hardly worthy of High Command's attention," said another commander, irritation evident in the flaring of her neck frills. "It is not merely a word, Commander," Skarath continued. "It appears to be a concept of sacred significance to humans. Our field agents report that humans react with extreme emotional displays when this concept is threatened. More significantly, human diplomatic representatives become evasive when pressed for a precise definition." The Central Commander's vertical pupils narrowed to slits. "You suspect deliberate concealment." "I suspect a potential weakness," Skarath replied. "The humans have integrated themselves deeply into Alliance infrastructure with remarkable speed. They are disproportionately represented in critical sectors. If they possess some unifying ideology or belief system hidden from the translator, and by extension from us, it represents a security concern." "What do we know about this kindergarten?" asked a third commander. "It appears to be connected to juvenile humans. Locations designated by this term contain high concentrations of human young, typically between 3 and 6 standard years of age. They are heavily secured facilities despite having no apparent military or strategic value." The central commander was silent for a long moment, her massive tail twitching slightly, the only indication of her intense calculation. Finally, she spoke. "The rapid expansion of human influence has long concerned the Dominion. If they are concealing some core principle or strategy from the Alliance, we must uncover it. You have my authorization to escalate your investigation, First Intelligence Officer. Determine the true meaning of this concept and assess whether it poses a threat to Draken interests." "And if it does?" Skarath asked. The central commander's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth, the Draken equivalent of a smile. "Then we shall remove the threat as we have always done." The investigation proceeded with the methodical thoroughness characteristic of Draken operations. Intelligence agents infiltrated human communities throughout Alliance space. They observed the facilities called kindergartens and monitored communications relating to them. They captured and interrogated human educators, though the results were frustratingly inconclusive. "They claim it is merely a place where young humans begin their education," Skarath reported at the next High Command meeting. "But our neural probes detect emotional responses inconsistent with such a mundane explanation. The subjects demonstrate protective impulses of extraordinary intensity when discussing these facilities." "What do they teach in these places?" demanded the central commander. "Basic skills, apparently. Recognition of symbols, rudimentary mathematics, physical coordination exercises. But there is something else. Something our translators cannot fully capture. The humans speak of nurturing potential and cultivating the future. When pressed, they become emotional or philosophical in ways that defy precise translation." Another commander interjected, "Could it be religious indoctrination, a means of programming their young with anti-alliance sentiments?" "Possibly," Skarath conceded. "But if so, it is subtle enough to have escaped detection by other Alliance species for over 2 centuries. "What of the human homeworld?" asked the central commander. "Have we located the origin point of this concept?" "We believe so." Skarath activated a holographic display showing a blue-green planet. "Intelligence has traced the linguistic route to a minor continental power on the human homeworld. But the concept has spread to all human colonies. They have established these kindergartens on every world, where humans constitute more than 5% of the population." The central commander rose from her thermal platform, her massive form casting long shadows in the crimson light. "This is no mere cultural peculiarity. It bears all the hallmarks of a coordinated expansion strategy. The humans are planning something using these facilities to prepare their next generation for some purpose they wish to conceal from the Alliance." "What do you recommend?" asked the war commander, speaking for the first time. The central commander's decision was swift and absolute. "We will excise this cancer before it can metastasize further. Identify the human colony world with the highest concentration of these kindergarten facilities. We will make an example of it demonstrate to the humans that their secrets cannot protect them. The Alliance Council will object to unprovoked aggression against a member species," cautioned another commander. "Then we shall provide provocation," the central commander replied. "Fabricate evidence of human bioweapon research at the target location. By the time the truth is discovered, the humans will have learned their lesson. The Dominion does not tolerate threats, no matter how cleverly disguised." The target was New Horizon, a human colony in the Epsilon Eridani system. Established 73 years earlier, it had grown into a thriving world with a population of approximately 12 million. Its temperate climate and Earth-like gravity had made it particularly attractive to human families, and it boasted the highest birth rate of any human settlement outside the Sol system. For the Draken, this made it the perfect target. The attack began with no declaration of war, no warning at all. A biological agent was released into New Horizons' atmosphere, engineered to target human DNA exclusively. It caused no immediately apparent symptoms. The Draken wanted no mass evacuation to dilute the impact of what was to come. 3 local days later, when the pathogen had thoroughly infiltrated the population, the Dominion fleet arrived. Massive warships entered orbit around New Horizon, deploying radiation weapons calibrated to activate the biological agent. The effect was catastrophic. Human bodies began to break down at the cellular level, an agonizing process that took hours to complete. As the population died in unimaginable pain, Draken ground forces landed at key locations. They were not there to conquer or occupy, merely to observe and record. The Dominion wanted detailed documentation of the colony's destruction to use in future negotiations with human leaders. It was during this phase that the Draken discovered something unexpected, an underground complex beneath New Horizons' capital city. The facility was vast, heavily shielded, and contained thousands of stasis pods. Inside each pod was a human child preserved in suspended animation. They were preparing for war, the Central Commander declared when presented with this evidence. Creating some kind of specialized army, perhaps genetically modified soldiers developed from their young. The discovery prompted an escalation. Instead of leaving the planet's infrastructure intact as originally planned, the Dominion fleet initiated orbital bombardment. Concentrated energy weapons reduced cities to molten slag. Missile strikes targeted transportation networks and power generation facilities. Within days, New Horizon, once a jewel of human colonial achievement, was a radioactive wasteland. The final death toll was 11,827,653 humans. Not a single survivor remained on the planet's surface. The Alliance Council convened an emergency session immediately upon receiving news of the attack. The Draken representative presented their fabricated evidence of bioweapon research, claiming the strike had been a necessary preemptive action to prevent an imminent threat to Alliance security. The human delegation sat in silence throughout the presentation. No objections, no emotional outbursts, no demands for justice. Their restraint was unnerving even to species that had known humans for generations. Finally, when the Draken representative concluded, the human ambassador rose. He was an elderly man, his hair white, his face lined with age. When he spoke, his voice was steady and devoid of its usual warmth. The Alliance Charter guarantees member species the right to respond to aggression against their people. Humanity recognizes this right and will exercise it. We have nothing further to say at this time. With that, the entire human delegation stood and exited the council chamber, leaving a disturbed silence in their wake. For 6 months, following the destruction of New Horizon humans throughout Alliance space, seemed to withdraw from public life. They continued to perform their duties, treating patients, teaching students, maintaining critical infrastructure, but they spoke little, socialized less, and declined all diplomatic engagements beyond the absolutely necessary. Like the silence of a rainforest before a storm, remarked a Calarian observer to her colleague. Have you ever visited a jungle world when atmospheric pressure suddenly drops? Every creature falls silent simultaneously. It is nature's warning system, the quiet, that precedes catastrophe. The Draken dismissed such concerns. Their military readiness was increased as a precaution, but intelligence reports indicated no unusual movements of human military assets. The few human warships in Alliance space remained in their assigned sectors, running standard patrols. Earth itself, while draped in mourning displays, showed no signs of mobilizing for war. They are a soft species, the war commander said dismissively. They value their emotional attachments, their comforts. The loss of one colony, however traumatic, will ultimately teach them their place in the galactic order. It was a fundamental miscalculation. The first incident occurred on Draconis Prime, a core world of the Dominion. A human medical officer, a cardiac specialist who had served in the Central Hospital for 15 years, entered the residential compound of a regional governor during night cycle. By morning, the governor and his entire household staff were dead, their bodies contorted in positions that suggested extreme pain before death. The human was captured attempting to leave the planet. Under interrogation, she revealed that she had synthesized a neurotoxin specifically calibrated to Draken physiology and administered it through the compound's water filtration system. When asked why, after 15 years of loyal service, she had committed such an act, her answer was chilling in its simplicity. "I have 3 children," she said. "They could have been on New Horizon." She was publicly executed her death broadcast across Dominion territories as a warning. It had precisely the opposite effect than intended. Within days, reports began flooding in from across Draken space. A human waste management engineer had introduced a corrosive agent into a military manufacturing facility, destroying equipment valued at billions of credits. A human teacher had taught Draken younglings songs containing embedded psycholinguistic triggers that would cause cognitive dissonance upon maturation. A retired human transport pilot had crashed a civilian shuttle into a Dominion communications array, disrupting military coordination for a crucial 17 hours. These were not coordinated military strikes. There was no central command, no detectable communication network linking these incidents. They were individual acts of sabotage and vengeance, carried out by ordinary humans who had lived peacefully among Draken populations for years or decades. The Dominion responded with increasingly desperate security measures. Humans were removed from sensitive positions, then from all positions of responsibility, then confined to designated areas under constant surveillance. Those who resisted were killed immediately. Those who complied were subjected to neurological scanning to detect hostile intent. Nothing stemmed the tide. For every human apprehended or eliminated, 3 more revealed themselves as saboteurs. The pattern was replicated across every Dominion world, every Draken military installation, every trading outpost where humans and Draken coexisted. In desperation, the Dominion appealed to the Alliance Council, accusing humanity of conducting terrorist operations and violating the prohibition against assassinating civilian leadership. The human delegation attended this session, but again remained silent throughout the Draken presentation. When invited to respond, the human ambassador simply said, "The Dominion removed 11,827,653 human lives from the universe. We are still calculating an appropriate response. We have nothing further to say at this time." As the internal disruption reached crisis levels, the Dominion's military intelligence detected a new threat. The consolidated human fleet was on the move. Not the limited Alliance peacekeeping forces that included human vessels, but Earth's own defense fleet, hundreds of warships that had never before ventured beyond the Sol system's outer boundaries. They were approaching Dominion space from multiple vectors, advancing with a methodical precision that suggested long planning. "Broadcast our demands," ordered the central commander. "They will disperse their fleet or face the consequences." The message was transmitted on all frequencies. "Attention human forces. You are approaching sovereign Dominion territory without authorization. Dispersal of your fleet is required immediately. Non-compliance will be considered an act of war." The human ships continued their advance without acknowledging the transmission. A second message was sent. "This is your final warning. The Dominion possesses weapons capabilities that can eradicate your species entirely. Stand down your forces immediately." Still, there was no response. The Dominion launched its first strike against the approaching human fleet, a massive barrage of long-range missiles designed to penetrate energy shields and disrupt shipboard electronics. Most of the missiles never reached their targets, intercepted by defense systems of surprising sophistication. Those that did connect seemed to cause minimal damage. The human ships continued their advance, now accelerating. "They're not even returning fire," reported a tactical officer, bewilderment evident in his voice. "They're just coming." For the first time in generations, fear entered the central command chamber. The Draken had miscalculated badly, and they knew it. The human fleet split into tactical groups as it entered Dominion space, each group targeting a different Draken world. Their strategy became clear: They were establishing blockades, cutting off Dominion planets from supply lines and reinforcements. There were no bombardments, no landing parties, just the slow, methodical isolation of every Draken population center. When the Dominion attempted to break these blockades, they discovered the true capability of human military technology. Ships that had appeared defensive in posture suddenly revealed offensive capabilities that outmatched Draken weaponry by significant margins. The Dominion lost 63 capital ships in the first engagement alone. Surviving commanders reported that human targeting systems seemed to prioritize military vessels over civilian transports, a distinction the Draken themselves rarely made in warfare. It was as if humanity wanted to demonstrate that they could be selective in their vengeance, that the suffering of New Horizon had not stripped them of all restraint. As the noose tightened around Draken space, the Central Commander authorized a desperate gambit, a direct assault on Earth itself. If the human homeworld could be held hostage, perhaps their advance could be halted. A stealth battle group was dispatched through a seldom-used hyperlane bypassing the main confrontation zones. It was the pride of the Dominion fleet, 5 dreadnoughts equipped with planet-killer weaponry similar to that used on New Horizon. They never reached the Sol system. The battle group vanished without transmitting any distress signals. No debris was ever found. 3 months into the conflict, human forces had pushed deep into Dominion territory, systematically isolating and neutralizing Draken military assets, while leaving civilian infrastructure largely intact. The pattern was consistent across all fronts: precise, methodical advance with minimal collateral damage. The Dominion's defensive lines collapsed one after another, until only Draconis Prime, the ancestral homeworld and seat of the High Command, remained under full Draken control. Even there, orbital defenses had been reduced to 30% capacity by human strikes. It was then that the human flagship entered communications range of Draconis Prime. A transmission was broadcast across all frequencies, directed not just to Draken leadership, but to the planet's entire population. The face that appeared on screens throughout the Dominion capital was that of a human female, middle-aged by their standards, wearing the uniform of Earth's highest military rank. 5 stars gleamed on her collar. "I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen," she began, her voice calm and measured. "I speak to you as both Prime Minister of the United Earth Government and Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces." The Universal Translator rendered her words into perfect Draken, including the subtle harmonic markers that denoted absolute authority in their language, a nuance few non-Draken ever mastered. The human colony of New Horizon was home to 11,827,653 souls. They were civilians' families who had chosen to build new lives on a distant world. Among them were 134,982 children under the age of 10 Earth years. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes had taken on a hardness that transcended species barriers. "Your leaders ordered their extermination without declaration of war, without provocation, without honor. We have accessed your command records. We know the decision was based on fear of a word your translators could not interpret." Here she paused, allowing the weight of this revelation to settle across Draken consciousness. "Your intelligence services discovered human facilities called kindergartens, and concluded they represented some kind of threat. Rather than simply asking us to explain, rather than trusting the peaceful coexistence our peoples have maintained for generations, your leaders chose genocide." The Central Commander, watching from the High Command bunker deep beneath the capital city, felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through her ancient body. It took several moments to identify its shame. Admiral Chen continued, "For 6 months we gave you the opportunity to acknowledge your crime, to offer reparations, to hold accountable those responsible. You responded with executions of human civilians and threats of further destruction. You have left us no choice but to answer in terms your leadership will understand." The human fleet surrounding Draconis Prime adjusted its formation. Weapon systems activated across hundreds of vessels, their energy signatures registering on Draken sensors. "Before the final judgment comes, Admiral Chen said, "I have one question for the architects of New Horizons' destruction. The same question asked by every human parent who lost a child to your weapons. The question that has driven our response since that day." She leaned closer to the camera, her expression containing something the translator struggled to convey: a complex emotion, blending grief, rage, and an implacable sense of justice. Why did you kill our children?" The Central Commander ordered an immediate response transmission. Her message was brief. "The Dominion surrenders unconditionally. We request mercy for our civilian population." Admiral Chen's reply came swiftly. "There was no mercy for New Horizon." The bombardment of Draconis Prime began 17 minutes later. Unlike the Draken attack on New Horizon, it was precisely targeted. Government buildings, military installations, command bunkers, all were reduced to molecular ash by weapons of astonishing accuracy. Residential areas remained largely untouched, though the psychological impact of watching their civilization's power centers vaporized left the population in traumatized shock. The High Command bunker, designed to withstand any known weapon in the galaxy, held out for almost 3 hours. When it finally collapsed, the Central Commander and her staff were buried beneath 3 kilometers of molten rock. The Alliance Council, which had observed the conflict without intervention, issued a statement expressing deep concern about the escalation, but acknowledging humanity's right to proportional response under the Charter's self-defense provisions. There was no move to send peacekeeping forces into the conflict zone. As suddenly as it had begun, the war ended. Human forces established a temporary administration on Draconis Prime and other major Dominion worlds. There were no mass arrests, no public executions, no forced population transfers, all tactics the Draken themselves had employed in past conquests. Instead, human administrators focused on maintaining essential services and preventing the complete collapse of Draken society. Medical aid was provided to civilians injured during the bombardment. Food distribution systems were secured and enhanced. Educational facilities were reopened within weeks, though, with curricula stripped of militaristic content. The most significant policy implemented by the human administration was a thoroughgoing disarmament of all Dracon military assets. Warships were dismantled. Weapons manufacturing facilities were converted to civilian production. Military training academies were closed permanently. The species that had defined itself through martial prowess for millennia was systematically demilitarized. Throughout this process, human officials maintained the same quiet, efficient demeanor that had characterized their military campaign. They were neither cruel nor kind, simply implacable in their execution of a predetermined plan. 6 months after the fall of Draconis Prime, control of internal affairs was returned to a newly formed Dracon civilian government. Human forces began a phased withdrawal from Dominion space, leaving behind only observation posts to ensure compliance with disarmament treaties. The day the last human administrator left Draconis Prime, a marker was erected in the central plaza of the capital city, a simple obsidian obelisk inscribed with the names of every human who had died on New Horizon. The list covered the entire monument, names rendered in letters so small they were barely legible individually, yet collectively they formed a solid black mass visible from every approach to the city center. Beneath the names was an inscription in both human and Draken languages: "Remember." 5 years passed. The galactic community adjusted to the new reality, a chastened, demilitarized Draken Dominion, and a human presence that had returned to its pre-war patterns of quiet integration into Alliance infrastructure. The incident was not forgotten indeed. Annual memorial services were held on human worlds, but the white-hot fury that had driven the human response seemed to have cooled into something more controlled. On the 5th anniversary of New Horizons' destruction, now officially designated as the Day of Sorrow throughout human space, a remarkable event took place. On every world where humans constituted more than 1% of the population, they appeared in public wearing garments of absolute black. No insignia, no decorative elements, no variations in shade, just pure light-absorbing black from head to foot. They went about their normal activities, treating patients, teaching classes, operating transit systems, conducting research, but did so in complete silence, except when verbal communication was absolutely necessary for safety or critical functions. The effect was profoundly unsettling to the other species, who had grown accustomed to human expressiveness. More unsettling still was the unveiling ceremony held simultaneously on 1,000 worlds across Alliance space. On each planet, humans gathered around newly constructed monuments of black obsidian, smaller versions of the obelisk on Draconis Prime, but bearing the same endless list of names. At precisely the same moment, coordinated across vast interstellar distances, human children approached these monuments. Each child carried a small object, a drawing, a craft project, or a toy. These items were placed at the base of the monuments in solemn silence. Then, the children stepped back to stand with the adults, their young faces as grave and composed as their elders. It was during this ceremony that the Draken ambassador to the Alliance Council, a civilian diplomat from the new government, approached the human delegation. For the first time since the war, a high-ranking Draken official addressed human representatives directly. "My government has authorized me to ask," she said, her voice carefully modulated to convey respect rather than the traditional Draken dominance harmonics, "if you would now explain the word that caused such fear among our former leaders. We believe understanding may help prevent such tragic misunderstandings in the future." The human ambassador, still the same elderly man who had represented humanity throughout the crisis, regarded the Draken with weary eyes. "The word kindergarten," he said, "comes from an ancient human language. It translates literally as children's garden, a place where the youngest of our species begin their education. But it is more than an educational facility," the Draken pressed gently. "Our analysts determined it held some deeper significance." "Yes," the human acknowledged, "it does." He gestured toward the ceremony, visible through the council chamber's vast windows, where human children were still placing their offerings before the monument. In human cultures across our history, children have represented our future, our continuation as a species, the vessels into which we pour our hopes, our knowledge, our values. The kindergarten is where this process begins in earnest. It is where we nurture potential, where we begin to shape the adults our children will become. "Your former leaders were correct in one respect," he continued. "Kindergartens are sacred to us, though not in any religious sense. They are sacred because they represent everything we value: growth, learning, innocence, possibility. When your people targeted New Horizon, a world chosen specifically for its high population of children, you struck at the very soul of humanity." The Draken ambassador's neck frills drooped in a gesture of profound regret. "And our punishment was measured accordingly." "Not punishment," the human corrected. "Justice, there is a difference." "What happens now?" asked the Draken. "Will there ever be true peace between our peoples?" The human ambassador was silent for a long moment, watching the children at the monument. "That," he said finally, "will depend on whether your people truly understand what was lost on New Horizon. Not just lives, though. Each one was precious beyond measure, but potential. Futures that will never be realized. Songs never sung. Discoveries never made. Joys never experienced." He turned back to the Draken, his aged face solemn. "We do not seek your extinction or your perpetual subjugation. But we will never forget. The monuments will stand for as long as our species endures, to remind us and you of the cost of fear and misunderstanding." The Draken ambassador bowed her head. "We will remember," she promised, "and we will learn." As they spoke across the galaxy, human children continued placing their offerings before the obsidian monuments, bright splashes of color against the absolute black of the stone. Drawings of fantastic creatures and imaginary worlds. Handcrafted models of starships and planets. Toys representing characters from beloved stories. Creations of innocent minds still learning to shape their thoughts into forms others could understand. Small emblems of potential, of futures still unfolding. Tiny gardens of possibility cultivated with care by the generations that came before. That, in the end, was what the word meant, and why its desecration had awakened such terrible vengeance in a species otherwise known for its compassion. Not just children, but childhood. Not just education, but the sacred space where dreams take their first coherent form. Not just a stage of development, but the very wellspring of humanity's enduring strength, their ability to imagine better worlds, and then bring them into being. Kindergarten. That one word,